Good evening. You're watching The Right Stand here on CNN News 18 with me, Poonam Burde. Let's begin with some of the highlights of the day. And of course, the biggest talking point that has been on the lips of everyone around the world is Virat Kohli scoring his 50th ODI century during the World Cup semi-final against New Zealand. The match is still underway, but this was a feat that was achieved by Virat Kohli in Wankhede in Mumbai. With his 50th ton, Virat Kohli has now broken Sachin Tendulkar's record of the most ODI centuries. He bowed down to his idol right after he scored that century, Sachin Tendulkar. He broke his records. Congratulatory messages, of course, pouring in from across not just the cricketing world. Prime Minister Modi too congratulating him for this historic feat. Prime Minister Modi today also launched a 24,000 crore Pradhan Mantri particularly vulnerable tribal groups mission. This happened on the birth anniversary of tribal icon Birsa Munda. It happened in Jharkhand this morning. The mission focuses on the delivery of 11 interventions under 9 ministries for the holistic development of 75 PVTGs across 18 states and union territories of this country. This scheme aims to improve socio-economic conditions of the vulnerable tribals. It is expected to benefit around 28 lakh people across the country. ISRO has launched robotics challenge for aspirants that are interested in space missions. There's a cash prize that has been announced of 5 lakh rupees as well. ISRO has invited applications from youths for innovative ideas and designs of robotic rovers for future missions not just on Moon but on other planetary bodies as well. The aim of this initiative is to create unique opportunities for academia and for the industry in the space robotics sector. Now, on to our top focus on The Right Stand. That is the Israel-Hamas war. Now, it's been 5 weeks since Israel began its assault against Hamas. The fate of Gaza's best-equipped Al-Shifa hospital has now become the focus of international alarm. The world is watching this ground offensive because of the worsening conditions in that facility. Today, the IDF stormed into the hospital. They've been standing guard outside the gates of this hospital for a few days now. But today, they stormed in a bid to unearth Hamas's terror factories. The Israeli military called the operation a precise and targeted operation against Hamas in a specified area. But there are testimonies that are now coming to the fore from inside the hospital of doctors, of patients, of family members of patients who are inside, and those are heartbreaking. These stories are perhaps the reason why we're not seeing some of these allies of Israel perhaps change their tone. Before we get to that, here's what the ground offensive looked like today. IDF intensified its crackdown on Hamas. The troops entered Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa. They said that there are no frictions with civilians or patients inside and they had evacuated everyone. Several claims have been made. IDF said that they had delivered medical equipment and incubators while they were at the hospital. They also then said that Hamas operatives were hiding inside these hospitals, inside Al-Shifa as well. They were operating from there, which is why it was important for them to storm in. The IDF also claimed that they are carrying out precise operation against Hamas and the civilians are not going to be caught in crossfire. They said that they had found weapons and that the terror infrastructure was very much present in hospitals like the Al-Shifa. They also said that Hamas has held hostages that are captive in these Gaza hospitals. They got us a report from one such hospital yesterday as well. Now, Israel's closest allies, Canada and the United States, two countries that one of the first few countries to come out and defend Israel and say that their right to self-defense was paramount. They too have now come out and cautioned Israel. They've warned them from laying siege on hospitals in Gaza. Canada perhaps came out with the strictest criticism today. Justin Trudeau said that we urge Israel to exercise maximum restraint. The United States said that we don't support striking of hospitals, a caution tone there being taken. Canada then went on to say that we do not want babies to be killed. That must end. To which US also then said that hospitals and patients must be protected as well. That is something that Israel has to look into. Canada then also went on to say that we're talking about hostages, but it's not just Israel. Hamas also needs to do their bit. Hamas must stop using civilians as shields and only then will this fighting or hospitals being caught in the crossfire will stop. United States also sent out a cautionary tale. They said that Hamas is using hospitals as military bases and that really needs to stop. We do not support striking of hospitals. You cannot be making hospitals a battlefield was the clear message. Hamas should release the 200-odd hostages is what Canada also went on to say. The United States said that these hostages that are being held captive in hospitals must be released soon. But the criticism that came to the fore, especially from the Canadian side, did meet with a equal rebuttal from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He minced no words. He rebuked his critics, specifically Justin Trudeau. Benjamin Netanyahu said that it's not Israel but Hamas that is deliberately targeting civilians. Israel is keeping civilians out of harm's way, and it's Hamas that are using them as shields, is what the clear message of the IDF and the Israeli Prime Minister is. Israel is providing humanitarian corridor. There are safe zones to civilians that have been set up, so we are not the ones putting them in the line of fire. Israel said that it is Hamas, not Israel, that should be held accountable for killings of civilians in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu also said that Hamas is targeting civilians while hiding behind them. Forces of civilization must back Israel in defeating Hamas, and this barbarism must stop. That was the clear message that Benjamin Netanyahu sent out, not just to Justin Trudeau but to all other critics who have been questioning of whether these are excesses coming to the fore from the Israeli side. Now, Hamas so far has claimed that they have no role to play in the attacks that took place in Gaza hospitals, that killing of innocent civilians, or that they are not being used as shields, and it really is Israel that's the oppressor in this particular case. But here are some facts, some independent ones at that, not made by the IDF, that counter this claim. There are anecdotal and other evidence that do suggest that Hamas and other factions have been using civilian objects, including hospitals and schools. There have been instances like this in the past. Some journalists in 2014 had encountered armed men inside one such hospital on the Gaza Strip. There are sightings of senior Hamas leaders inside the Al-Shifa hospital on multiple occasions. They were documented as well. Back in 2014, during the conflict, the UN reported weapons were found inside 2 schools that are run by UN, which are not very far away from these hospitals. There have been numerous reports of Palestinian armed factions in Gaza that have fired rockets and other weapons from close to protected civilian locations. So this is not the first time that Hamas has used civilians as human shields. It continues, which gives Israel the justification for their ground offensive. But is there a line? Should that line be crossed? And are allies now changing tune? Before we get into that debate, let's take a look at what exactly has transpired so far.
Hello, Moto.
Joining me on this broadcast, Sushant Sureen, Strategic Affairs Expert and Senior Fellow at the ORF, Adam Scott Bellows, CEO of Israel Innovation Fund, Ibrahim Abu Ahmad, the Director Alumni of Relations at Ropes and a Peace Activist, joins me on this broadcast, and Edward P. Joseph, faculty at the Johns Hopkins University, also joining me here on this debate. Let me begin by asking Mr. Ibrahim Abu Ahmad, you know, we're talking about hospitals that are being in the middle of the entire crossfire here. We're seeing the plight of the patients there, of civilians there. Can you deny that Hamas has been using these hospitals as their headquarters, as their factories to stash their arms and arsenal? Mr. Ahmed? I believe, sir, you've muted yourself. If you could just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I'm saying the first thing that you're asking about whether or not I deny or not, you know, first of all, I'm not on the ground. I'm not in the hospitals. We saw the video that the IDF released from the hospital. And honestly, I'm a Palestinian and Israeli citizen together. And I say it as an Israeli citizen that I expect to see more of what actually is going on in these hospitals from the video that was released. But honestly, we don't need these videos in order to realize that Hamas has no interest to protect the civilians of Gaza Strip. Hamas leaders outside of Gaza said so themselves in their own mouths. I don't understand why we need to have this argument whether or not Hamas is seeking the interest of the people, because it clearly said, when asked what is it doing with the tunnels and why not a single tunnel was made. You know, if you are a militant group and you're fighting against a state, one of your strategies must be to find one way to protect your own people. But when you say that the responsibility of the people of Gaza is not yours, it's only Israel and the international community, how are you fighting for these people if you don't even see them as part of your own personal responsibility? So that's the question that we have today. But I think the argument that is happening in the media, whether or not Israel is justified to attack and whether or not the Palestinians are justified to resist, it's all a question of morality, to be honest. It's the media feeding the voices of pro-Israelis and pro-Palestinians with the voice and speakers that will give them what they want to hear in order to justify their moral ambiguity of, is it okay that I'm pro-Palestinian? Is it okay that I'm pro-Israeli? And how can I justify that? And we put people in order for them to argue and to show that one side, is more better than the other. What the world needs to do, what the whole international media and the international community as a whole needs to do, is to push for ending this conflict overall, not just this war. If we end this war tomorrow and we have a conflict in a few days, another war in 2 days, what did we do by that? We need a real call to end this conflict overall from the international community, to put pressure on both sides that this is enough. It's the last time. This is the last straw.
Sure. Sure, and this has been going on for decades together. There has to be a long-term solution that we see, because more often than not, every time we saw a conflict happen there, it was brushed aside by many world powers, including the United States. But now the United States seems to be in a precarious position. I want to get in Adam Scott Bellows as well. As far as Israel and its ground offensive is concerned, up until now, we had all of its allies unequivocally defend the action. They said it was their right of self-defense, and Israel was within its right to do what they wanted. But now we have both the US cautioning and Justin Trudeau and Canada also coming out and saying that you cannot have civilians, especially infants and babies, being in the line of fire. Why do you think we're suddenly seeing this change in tone and tenor of allies? Are they sensing some sort of unease, perhaps, that the IDF, the Israeli government, may just cross the line?
I'm still just confused from the answer of the first gentleman. There was like a lot of words, but I didn't actually hear like a coherent thought in there, so I'm a little confused. I'm also a little confused as to why anybody cares what Justin Trudeau says at all, especially after the embarrassment that he's caused multiple times since the conflict has started. The State Department yesterday literally came out and changed their entire tune, saying instead of maybe asking Israel to avoid fighting near or inside of hospitals, maybe we should be asking Hamas to vacate those hospitals. Kind of seen, it's beautiful proof that terrorist infrastructure has been built. It's very clear that the safety and security of the Palestinian people were not up to speak. If that makes sense. Sorry, my camera kind of froze for a second, but I don't really understand what the debate is here. There was a clear violation of international law and multiple war crimes committed on October 7th.
Yes.
Just in the beginning, it was just a violation of the ceasefire. So I don't really understand how or why we're still debating whether or not Israel should have done, could have done, or had the right to respond. I don't think anybody's changing their tune. It's actually quite clear that the international community, or at least the Americans at the very least, are quite clear that the theater of war in Gaza is wrapping up because Hamas's infrastructure is clearly crumbled. So if we could just in this debate, if we could just stay in the realms of reality, that would be fantastic. I know I would appreciate it.
Sure, I understand where you're coming from, but it's not just Canada. We're also seeing, and there are reports suggesting that there is some sort of unease within the Biden administration as well. Hamas came out and said that it's Biden really that is, or America, that should be held wholly responsible for what is transpiring at the hospitals in Gaza. There are reports that are suggesting that the United States is also under pressure from a lot of its Arab allies, because they see that
yeah, I mean, who cares what Hamas says?
Sure,
they started this war.
Sure.
So I don't really think the Biden administration really cares what Hamas says in terms of whose blood on their hands. There's one group.
But like I said, there are some Arab allies as well and there are interests in the region for many of these countries, including the United States.
We saw Turkey call Israel a terrorist state yesterday. I don't think that anyone takes Turkey seriously, to be completely honest. It's not like I mean, we are looking towards the end of the fighting of one front of this war. There's obviously always going to be public pressures that are done and different things that are done in the background as well. But I think one thing that has been made very clear and will become even more clear is how, what will become more clear is how many war crimes or double, triple, quadruple war crimes were committed, given the amount of civilian infrastructure we've now seen that Hamas's military wing has been embedded inside of. And not only that, there have been reports from the field that people are leaving their keys in their homes so that Hamas is able to enter their homes to hide. As well, there have been whole houses, from what I understand, that have been built on top of the entrances of these tunnels. And they're not actually houses, they're just entrances to look like they're civilian residences, but that are actually tunnel entrances. So
and those tunnels have been being built for the last few years, is what we're now learning. So there are questions that are being raised as to how Israel's intelligence failed to even look into that, if they've been building these tunnels below hospitals, below schools, below UN buildings for the past decade or so. But I want to get in Sushant Sareen as well, and with talking about the larger ramifications of this. Just a few weeks ago, we had, just a few days ago, in fact, we had Benjamin Netanyahu go on to say that this is going to be a long-drawn war and our aim is to finish it come what may. But at what cost are we going to see that? And for how long, in your opinion, is this going to be dragging on for?
Poonam, I think it's very difficult for anybody to say how long this is going to drag on for. It depends on how quickly, at least insofar as Hamas is concerned, the Israelis are successful in degrading them and eliminating these guys, finishing off this organization. I think that will be the critical measure, because that is the objective which Israel has set for itself. But look, I've always maintained that Hamas at the end of the day is not just an organization, it's a mindset, it's an ideology. And I think one of the greatest failures of the Western world since 9/11, and even before that, in fact, before that they were in denial, but post 9/11, I think the greatest failure of the Western world has been that they simply haven't understood the phenomena which they are up against. And Hamas is only a manifestation of that jihadist phenomena which is sweeping through the world, in large parts of the world actually. So I don't know what we are going to do about that, because at the end of it, a lot of the problems in the Middle East emanate from this particular poisonous ideology, and nobody has done anything to address it. Nobody has done anything to dismantle it. You can dismantle an organization. How do you dismantle that ideology? Until you fight it. And when I look at the Western world and the discourse in the Western world, and also the division within the Western world between what's happening on the street and what's happening in the corridors of power, just as we see that in the Arab world, where I disagree with you, Poonam. I think bulk of the Arab world is not very unhappy about the treatment that is being meted out to Hamas. There might be some disquiet on, on how the war is being prosecuted, on whether there are going to be too many civilian casualties or collateral damage. But I think most Arab states are very happy to see the back of Hamas. It's the Arab street there is a dissonance between the Arab states and the Arab street. Forget Turkey. Turkey is not important. Forget Canada. I think Justin Trudeau is a travesty of a leader. But in bulk of the Western countries, I think there is an understanding that you have to get rid of organizations like Hamas. But I don't think there's sufficient recognition on how do you address that ideology, which we see play out on the streets of many of these Western countries.
Right, and I want to get in Edward P. Joseph as well. You know, like Sushant Sarin was pointing out, and many other experts would also say that a lot of this is because Western powers have failed to see the inherent issue here. They sort of glossed over it for decades together, which is why we've reached the point that we've reached here. Would you agree?
Well, first, let me say good to be with you, the other guests, and your viewers as well. And let me return to your original question, which are allies now changing tune, as I see the streamer across the screen. And I would agree with those speakers who said no, actually. They're not changing their tune towards this. Let me just, as I'm here in Washington, try to interpret the Biden administration position. President Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, anyone, any of us who is a human being with any heart has to be deeply troubled, first by the suffering of Palestinian civilians, and of course by the prospect of innocents in a hospital being caught in a crossfire, as the administration has cautioned, and this heartbreaking situation for Palestinian babies, and that's. Any normal sentient human being has to have that concern. And so President Biden and the State Department are reflecting that in their messaging and their messages to Israel. At the same time, they're very aware of reality. And this is the larger question here is if we are concerned, as we should be, about Palestinian suffering and ensuring the safety of Palestinians, the question is who bears the responsibility for that? And obviously Israel does have responsibility, but not sole responsibility. That's the key point here, and that's what the United States is conveying. And we heard that from the State Department spokesman in very clear terms, saying, what about Hamas's responsibility here? And why didn't Hamas accept the offer from Israel to provide fuel directly for the hospitals, and stating very clearly, the State Department spokesman stating yesterday that Hamas should vacate the hospitals. And let's remind your viewers here that to use a hospital as a site for military operations by Hamas, this is under the Geneva Conventions, this is formally a war crime. And that does not mean, of course, that Israel has no responsibility. And that's what the United States is trying to remind Israel, that this is a very difficult, complex dilemma.
Yes.
So everyone, of course, has to be concerned about the Palestinians in those hospitals. At the same time, the U.S. has not moved away. So it's not true there's a change in tone. The U.S. has not moved away from holding Hamas accountable here. And ultimately, we want to see this fighting and suffering end. It's actually not very complicated. Not complicated at all. Hamas only has to release the hostages and leave. The leadership leave. And there are prominent Israeli voices who say that ends the war. Not just this situation at the hospital, that ends the war. Please.
Yes, because many of those hostages are also foreign nationals. It's been 5 weeks and there's been absolutely no news. We had reports coming in of a prisoner swap kind of a deal that Hamas wanted with Israel, because they claim that a lot of Palestinians are in Israeli jails. Israel says they're all there because they have been found guilty on charges by the law in Israel. Something that Hamas may not be okay with, but that does not give you the license to kill, to attack innocents, to take hostages. And Ibrahim Abu Ahmad, I want to get you in on that as well. The very cause of the Palestinian people, don't you think that is Hamas is actually betraying that very cause by putting them in harm's way, by using them as human shields?
I mean, you're repeating the same question, I think, and trying to make the Arab voice that says that Hamas is against the Palestinians. I've already clarified that point. But I think the problem is beyond just what Hamas does. It's clear. We mentioned it. We say it. Hamas is not helping the Palestinian people in that way. Hamas has, and by the way, it's something that every rebel group that doesn't have a state, it has different tools, by the way, to fight against the state, and in order to establish its own identity. including illegitimate ones, including things that are unacceptable, in my opinion, as a peace activist, as terror attacks. But that's a tool that we've seen throughout the world. Ask our Jewish partners on this call what the Haganah did in Jerusalem in 1946.
I don't think that you can compare anything that the Haganah did to anything that happened on October 7th. That's absolutely no. That's
Mr.
absolutely
Bellows, I'll come back to you. Mr. Bellows, I'll come back to you and let Mr. Ahmad finish his point. I'll come back to you.
As I said, I believe the use of terror in any way, shape, or form is unacceptable. And the use of terror will not help the Palestinian people. Point blank. It will not help our people. It will not help the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It will not improve the situation. Terror will bring more horrors and terror. And actually, in fact, it will only put Palestinians in a worse situation. Because every time we saw violence, there were a reduction of two main things for the Palestinian people: rights and land. We as a Palestinian people, we need to make a change. We need to change. We need to make a decision. What do the Palestinian people want? And in order to achieve it, what are the right and legitimate tools to do it? Terror hasn't worked, and terror will not work. We need compromise.
Sure, I'm running short of time, but Mr. Bellows, I want you to have 30 seconds to rebut.
Before the point
I just think to compare anything
is that terror has been used in the past.
Not your colleague.
That it has been used.
Sure, I get the point you're trying to make.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'm running out of time, so I want Mr. Bellows to have his time to rebut. Yes, go ahead.
Actually, after over 100 years, now you guys need to make up your mind as to what you want, because you haven't actually figured out what you wanted. I'm just very confused, because the armed struggle for the last 100 years has been a total failure. Like you said, I mean, like, do you not want a state? Is this something
I want a two-state solution, my friend.
Okay, so you want a two-state solution, right? So and all the other times where you think now,
I always want
that
a
after
two-state
the
solution.
rejection of right. No. It's not about you wanting one or me wanting one or not wanting one.
There were seven different. Never fully wanted a two-state solution.
That is, I'm sorry. There were seven different opportunities. I'm sorry. There were 7 different opportunities to accept a state and to become economically independent. But the thing is that you guys have never.
Both sides did not take the chance.
I'm sorry, but like,
in order to reach peace, but to
single
put it on one side is
handed-
unacceptable. The only prime minister
It's
who
not
was
about
killed
one side
was
or another.
Israeli prime minister by a Jewish extremist, not a Palestinian.
Okay,
I'm
great.
sorry.
That
But the
has
one
no- but
person
that
who
has nothing
stopped
to
us
do
from
with
the
it.
peace treaty, it was we need to do it.
I'm sorry. The assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, if anything, allowed the peace process to be pushed for another 15 years, and is the reason why Bibi was unable to pull out of the peace treaty. I'm sorry. No, that's a complete
have a tit-for-tat situation. We cannot have civilians that are put in the crossfire every single time. There cannot be a tit-for-tat situation, irrespective of what happens. Unfortunately, I'm completely out of time. I have to leave it at that. But I thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us here on this broadcast and sharing your perspective.